My God, how could this be happening now? Ethan Walker's voice echoed inside the cold marble walls of his corner office on the 72nd floor of Walker Global's headquarters in Manhattan. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, a snowstorm warning glowed over the skyline. But the real storm was inside this glass box. His phone call ended with a hollow beep. The translator he had trusted for 5 years had just canceled. A car accident on the ICFDR drive. Alive, but stuck at the hospital, unreachable for at least 24 hours. Ethan ran a hand through his perfectly styled dark hair, messing it up for the first time that day. He glanced at the massive clock on the far wall. In exactly 40 minutes, the boardroom would be filled with 6 delegates from one of China's biggest tech giants. 6 men who did not speak enough English for a $300 million deal. The deal Ethan had chased for 8 exhausting months. If this fell apart because of one missing translator, the company's next quarter would collapse. Stockholders would panic, headlines would spread, and his late father's legacy would crack for the first time, under his watch. "Sir, I'm calling everyone I know," Veronica Hughes said from the doorway. She leaned against the frame, phone pressed to her ear, her crimson blazer sharp against the gray walls. Her green eyes flicked over him with something that looked more like interest than concern. "But no one in the city is available on such short notice, not in this weather. They're either booked or snowed in." Ethan ignored her tone. He tugged at his navy tie and pulled it loose altogether. "Offer double, triple if you have to. Just get someone here in 20 minutes. Veronica tilted her head, almost smiling. "Or we can use a translation app. Show them we're flexible." Ethan shot her a look that could freeze the Hudson River solid. "This is not ordering takeout, Veronica. One wrong phrase and we look incompetent. They'll pull the deal." Before she could reply, a quiet voice spoke from the hall. "Excuse me, sir?" Ethan turned sharply. Next to the open door, half hidden by a cleaning cart, stood a young woman in a neat maid's uniform. She held a spray bottle in one hand, a folded cloth in the other. Her blonde hair was tucked under a cap, pale blue eyes wide but clear. Emily Carter. He had seen her before, passing his office with the vacuum humming behind her, invisible like the furniture she polished. He had never wondered about her name, never needed to. But now she was standing in his doorway, voice shaking but firm. "I can help. I speak Mandarin." The hallway fell silent. Veronica's lips twitched into a mocking smile. "You? Emily, is it? Sweetheart, this isn't dusting a table. This is $300 million. Emily's fingers tightened around the spray bottle. "I studied Mandarin. I have a degree in East Asian studies. I know the dialect they use. Please, sir. Let me try." Ethan stared at her. His mind ran through every possible disaster, the snowstorm, the ticking clock, the absurd idea of trusting a maid with the biggest deal of his career. But behind the nerves in her eyes was something else, a spark that reminded him of something he could not quite name. Maybe it was the same look she had when he once caught her in the lobby, helping the old doorman pick up spilled groceries while everyone else walked by. Veronica scoffed, crossing her arms. "This is insane. She is just—" "Enough," Ethan said, cutting her off. His eyes locked on Emily's. "Say something in Mandarin." Emily took a breath. She stood straighter and spoke. The words rolled off her tongue, smooth and crisp, rising and falling in a rhythm Ethan did not understand but felt. He caught the tone, the respect in it, the quiet confidence. He did not know a single word, but he knew what trust sounded like when he heard it. For a moment, the storm inside him paused. Maybe this was the worst decision he would ever make, but as he looked at Emily Carter, the invisible maid who suddenly was not so invisible, he thought maybe, just maybe, this was the decision that would save everything. Emily Carter had never planned on spending her 20s wiping down glass walls and emptying wastebaskets on the top floor of a skyscraper. She used to tell herself it was temporary, just a job to pay the bills while she finished her degree. But temporary has a way of turning permanent when life does not cooperate. 3 years ago, Her father's heart had failed him during his night shift at a packaging warehouse in Queens. Her mother, always fragile, slipped into a cycle of hospital visits and unpaid bills that grew faster than Emily could count. Her little brother Noah had just started college, and Emily refused to let him drop out the way she had been forced to do. So, instead of walking across a stage in cap and gown, she traded her textbooks for a blue maid's uniform and an ID badge that read Carter Cleaning Services, assigned to the top 10 floors of Walker Global Tower. She told no one about the Mandarin textbooks she kept hidden in her small apartment closet, or the old laptop with bookmarked Chinese newspapers and business journals. Every night, after scrubbing marble floors and wiping down glass desks that cost more than her entire year's rent, she would come home, brew a cheap cup of coffee, and read a few pages just to keep her mind alive. No one noticed. They never did. Veronica Hughes walked past her every morning in designer heels without a glance. Executives greeted her only when they needed her to clear a coffee spill. Ethan Walker passed her in the lobby so many times she lost count, always with that distant focus of a man who had better things to see than the person pushing a cleaning cart. But once, just once, she saw something different. One late evening, when she thought the top floor was empty, she had found Ethan sitting alone at the long boardroom table, tie undone, staring at a single-framed photo of his father. She had paused in the doorway, not daring to breathe, and for a few seconds their eyes met. He did not say a word, but he did not look away either. Then his phone rang, he turned away, and she faded back into the corridor with her mop bucket, more ghost than girl. She wondered later if he remembered that moment at all. Probably not. To everyone else, Ethan Walker was the golden boy who had turned his father's modest real estate firm into a billion-dollar international conglomerate by 35. He wore success like his tailored suits, crisp and guarded, never a wrinkle out of place. Rumor among the building staff said he was ruthless in meetings but generous with salaries, that he had once paid for a secretary's cancer treatment in full, but fired a regional manager for lying about a $2,000 expense. They said he did not smile much, did not date after a messy divorce 5 years ago, and that Veronica Hughes, the PR queen with a smile sharp enough to cut glass, had been trying to become the next Mrs. Walker ever since. Emily had no illusions about where she stood in this tower of glass and marble. She was the background noise, the pair of hands that made the fingerprints disappear before morning. But deep down, behind the polite smile and quiet nods, she carried a stubborn dream she refused to bury completely. Sometimes she imagined herself back in a classroom, notebook open, listening to a guest lecturer from Beijing explain the subtleties of regional dialects. Sometimes she pictured herself standing in a real meeting, dressed in a crisp suit, her voice translating billion-dollar negotiations word for word without a single slip. Then her alarm would ring, and reality would remind her she had 8 hours of polishing conference tables ahead. Yet for all her silent ambition, Emily never expected fate to shove her dreams straight into her hands in the middle of a snowstorm. She never expected to stand in front of Ethan Walker and offer him the one thing no one else could provide at that exact moment. Downstairs, the lobby buzzed with the hum of heaters fighting off the bitter wind outside. A row of black luxury cars waited at the curb for the Chinese delegation. Emily could see them through the tall glass as she wheeled her cleaning cart back into the staff area, heart thumping so hard she thought everyone could hear it. She needed to change, to breathe, to remind herself she could do this. She could not afford to fail, not when this chance meant more than just a clean floor and a steady paycheck. In a small break room near the service elevators, she stood in front of a cracked mirror and slipped off her cleaning apron. Underneath, she wore a plain white blouse and black slacks she kept folded in her locker, just in case someone ever asked her to do more than mop. She combed her hair back into a tight bun, wiped her sweaty palms on a paper towel, and forced herself to meet her own eyes. "You can do this," she whispered. "You've always been able to do this." Outside the break room, Veronica waited like a shadow, arms crossed, eyes narrowed like a cat ready to pounce. She did not say a word as Emily walked past her toward the executive floor, but her silence spoke louder than any insult. Emily squared her shoulders. This time she would not be invisible. Not today. Ethan stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of the main conference room, staring at the line of black cars pulling up below. He could see his reflection in the glass, the same cold eyes everyone in this tower feared. But for once, he did not feel untouchable. The snow still fell in thick white sheets, blanketing the streets and trapping the entire city in a frozen gridlock. Inside this room, the heat was up too high, and Veronica's perfume lingered in the air like something he wanted to escape. He checked his watch again. 20 minutes. He could hear Veronica behind him, speaking into her phone in that overly sweet tone she used when she wanted something she did not deserve. He knew her game. He had always known. She was smart, ambitious, and dangerous when cornered. That made her useful, but it also made her reckless, something he could never afford to be. When he turned, he caught sight of Emily standing near the doorway, holding a thin folder and a cheap pen. She looked nothing like the maid he half remembered from the corner of his office. The crisp blouse and neat bun made her look younger, more fragile somehow, but her eyes were not the same. There was a focus in them that he recognized, the same burning edge he saw in the mirror during his worst nights building this company from the bones of his father's dead. He gestured her inside. "You're sure you can handle this?" he said, keeping his voice low enough so Veronica would not jump in with her sarcastic sighs. Emily nodded once. "Yes, sir. I know their company, their culture, their priorities. I can do this." Her voice was steady, but her fingers betrayed her as they tugged at the edge of her sleeve. Ethan noticed, then noticed that he was noticing. He hated how distracting that was, how human she suddenly seemed in this room of polished lies. Veronica's heels clicked closer. She rested a manicured hand on Ethan's shoulder, ignoring how he stiffened under her touch. "I still think this is a mistake," she said sweetly, eyes flicking to Emily like she was something stuck to the bottom of her heel. "If she messes up one phrase, it could cost us everything. Do you really want to risk that for a charity act?" Emily opened her mouth, but Ethan spoke first. "If you have a better idea, Veronica, say it now." The silence that followed spoke for her. Ethan turned to Emily again. "You have 10 minutes. Sit down, go over the notes, and if you need anything—" "I won't need anything," Emily said, her chin lifting just slightly. He felt a strange flicker in his chest at her stubbornness. It reminded him of himself, 20 years ago, trying to prove to board members 3 times his age that he was worth trusting with their millions. He watched her sit alone at the corner of the long mahogany table, flipping through the pages of the draft agreement, lips moving silently as she ran through the Chinese characters in her head. For a moment, he forgot about the blizzard, about the boardroom politics, about Veronica's poisonous smirk hovering just behind him. For a moment, he only saw Emily, a young woman clinging to a chance the world had told her she was not allowed to want. When the elevator dinged, the entire atmosphere shifted. Veronica's posture snapped into place, her best smile fixed as she moved to greet the delegation. Ethan took his place at the head of the table, calm mask firmly back on, but his mind was still half on Emily, still doubting and yet already hoping she would not prove him wrong. The Chinese delegates entered like a wave of silk and measured steps, 5 men in dark suits, and 1 middle-aged woman with a jade pin on her collar. Their leader, Mr. Chen, was an imposing figure, with silver hair combed precisely back and eyes that missed nothing. They exchanged polite bows and handshakes, murmured greetings that Veronica pretended to understand but clearly did not. Ethan introduced himself, then turned slightly toward Emily. "This is Emily Carter, our temporary cultural advisor," Ethan said carefully, ignoring the way Veronica's eyes narrowed at the word. Mr. Chen's gaze slid to Emily, taking in her simple blouse and trembling hands, then flicked back to Ethan with the faintest arch of an eyebrow. Ethan felt the question in that look. He prayed Emily would answer it well. Emily stepped forward and spoke in clear Mandarin. her tone formal yet warm, her words respectful but not submissive. The entire room seemed to lean in as her voice filled the awkward air. Mr. Chen's stern expression cracked, just enough to show a flicker of surprise. He responded in Mandarin, and when Emily replied without hesitation, the ice visibly thawed. As they moved to the long table, Emily stood by Ethan's side, translating smoothly as the formalities began. Her voice never wavered, even when Mr. Chen made a subtle joke that could have been misunderstood if delivered by a machine or someone untrained. She caught the nuance, flipped it into English for Ethan, then turned his reply back into Mandarin without missing a beat. Half an hour in, Ethan allowed himself his first real breath since the translator's phone call that morning. He could feel the tension easing around the polished wood table. The Chinese delegates laughed politely at his remarks, nodded at the adjustments in the contract terms, asked follow-up questions with genuine interest. None of this would have happened if they had felt insulted or confused. Every so often, Ethan would glance sideways at Emily as she worked, studying the small lines of focus between her brows, the way her lips curved around words he did not know but now trusted completely. Once, their eyes met when she passed him a note about a term she thought he should clarify. There was something there, a spark of connection he did not expect and definitely did not want to think about right now. Veronica sat farther down the table, tapping her pen like a ticking bomb. He could feel her watching Emily with that same cold calculation she usually reserved for rivals, not maids. When the delegates paused for tea, Veronica leaned close to Ethan and lowered her voice so only he could hear. "You're making a fool of yourself. They're probably laughing at us right now for letting the cleaning staff run negotiations. If this goes south, you're the one they'll blame." Ethan did not answer her. He only looked at Emily pouring tea for Mr. Chen, bowing slightly in perfect form, speaking with just the right balance of humility and quiet authority. He thought about what a fool he would have been if he had not listened to her voice in that hallway, if he had chosen an app over a human being who had spent years hidden right under his nose. The meeting stretched past an hour, then 2. Numbers were discussed, cultural expectations laid out, concerns about supply chain logistics in the new winter conditions debated back and forth. Emily handled every pivot without flinching. She even softened a tense moment when one delegate brought up a clause that could have been insulting if misunderstood. She smiled, rephrased Ethan's explanation, and offered an idiom so apt that the entire delegation chuckled and nodded in approval. When the final draft was reviewed, Mr. Chen turned to Ethan directly, but spoke through Emily, eyes glinting with something like newfound respect. He said in Mandarin, and Emily translated, "Mr. Walker, we appreciate your flexibility today. It shows good faith and understanding of our ways. We believe this partnership will be prosperous for both sides." Ethan almost smiled. He thanked them in English first, then glanced at Emily and added, "Please thank them properly." She did, her words flowing smooth and confident, her eyes meeting his for a fraction longer than needed. He wondered what she was thinking behind that calm face. Was she scared? Proud? Or maybe, like him, just astonished that the impossible had happened because two people, worlds apart in status, had found each other exactly when they needed to. As the delegates gathered their briefcases, Veronica stood up too fast, forcing a smile that cracked at the edges. She leaned toward Emily, her voice a poisonous whisper. "Enjoy the spotlight while it lasts. He'll forget your name tomorrow. People like you always go back to mopping floors." Emily's eyes did not drop this time. She met Veronica's stare head-on, then turned away to thank Mr. Chen again. Ethan caught the exchange, caught the flicker of something sharp under Emily's polite mask. Good, he thought. Let her keep that edge. She would need it. When the conference room finally emptied, the last of the delegation's laughter fading down the marble hallway, Ethan stayed seated at the head of the table. Emily gathered her notes, stacking them with neat hands that still trembled just a little. He watched her, the echo of Mandarin still fresh in his ears. "You did well today," he said quietly when the door finally closed behind the last executive. Emily froze for a heartbeat, then turned to face him. "Thank you, sir." He stood up, moved closer than he probably should have. "Not many people could have done what you just did. Not under this pressure." He paused, searching her face for any sign she might doubt the truth in his voice. "You didn't just save a deal. You saved my company's reputation. You saved my name." Emily swallowed hard, eyes glistening in the late afternoon light that slipped through the glass walls. "I just did my best." Ethan almost laughed at that. "Your best? You did more than any of us expected." For a second he wanted to say something else, something reckless about how he could not stop noticing her now that she was standing in front of him not as a maid, but as the single reason Walker Global was not making headlines for all the wrong reasons tonight. But he stopped himself. "One crisis at a time. You'll stay for the follow-ups," he said instead, voice settling back into the familiar command. "We have a dinner with them tonight. You'll come as my translator." Emily blinked. "Dinner?" "Yes, and tomorrow too if they ask for it." He hesitated, then added, softer, "I need you to stay, Emily. You understand that, right?" She nodded slowly, a small smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "Yes, sir, I understand." And standing there in the quiet aftermath of a storm that could have sunk him, Ethan realized for the first time in years that maybe trust was not so dangerous after all. Maybe, just maybe, he was not the only one in this tower who refused to be invisible any longer. The dinner reservation was at one of the city's oldest and most exclusive Chinese restaurants, a place known for discreet back rooms and flawless service. When Emily stepped out of the black town car behind Ethan, she felt her stomach twist in tight knots. She had changed into a simple dark dress borrowed from one of the building's receptionists, who pressed it into her hands with a conspiratorial smile after hearing about what she had pulled off that afternoon. Her hair was still pinned back, her cheap watch hidden under the sleeve. She walked beside Ethan through the frost-lined entryway, past the hushed conversations of old money families and powerful men who probably never looked twice at the staff refilling their teacups. Inside the private room, the mood was relaxed but guarded. The Chinese delegation, their coats hung neatly by the door, sat in a circle of polished wood and warm lantern light. Mr. Chen raised his cup of tea to Ethan, who returned the gesture with a nod. Emily took her seat just behind Ethan's right shoulder, close enough to catch every word, but distant enough to pretend she did not exist when it suited everyone. It was a role she knew by heart, but tonight it felt different. At first, the conversation moved easily. Familiar points about supply chain, timelines, expansion. Ethan spoke clearly, his voice smooth but firm, while Emily caught every subtle turn of phrase. Every old proverb dropped like a test. She translated each line with precision, ignoring the flicker of Veronica's mocking tone echoing in her head. She had done more in 2 hours than Veronica had done for this company in 2 years. She repeated that thought in her mind each time her pulse raced too fast. When the plates were cleared, Mr. Chen leaned back, folding his hands over his small belly, and looked straight at Ethan. He spoke in Mandarin, slowly, carefully, as if weighing each syllable. Emily listened, her pen hovering over her notepad, though she did not need to write any of this down. Mr. Chen asked about loyalty. He asked how Walker Global could guarantee that the promises made tonight would hold 6 months from now, a year from now, when new markets opened and more powerful partners came knocking. He asked who Ethan trusted at his side. Ethan did not look away from Mr. Chen, but his hand shifted on the table until his knuckles brushed against Emily's notepad. A small gesture, one no one else saw, but it steadied her breath. She translated his answer with care. Ethan said that trust was not given, it was earned in storms like today's, in moments when the world tested whether you would stand or fold. He said he trusted people who proved themselves when no one expected them to. Mr. Chen's eyes flicked to Emily just once, then back to Ethan, and a small smile pulled at the corner of his mouth. After dinner, back in the car, Ethan leaned his head against the cold window for a moment. Emily sat beside him, clutching her borrowed coat tight around her shoulders. The city lights blurred through the foggy glass. He turned to her, studying the way she stared at her hands like she was trying to convince herself she was really here. "You didn't eat much," he said. She looked up quickly. "I wasn't really hungry." Ethan almost smiled. "You should be proud tonight." She let out a soft laugh that sounded like it might break apart if she let it. "I don't know if I've had time to be proud yet." They sat in silence for a while as the car rolled through snow-lined avenues. Then she asked, so quietly he almost did not hear her, "Did I do enough for you?" Something in the way she asked it made him want to reach out, to tell her she had done more than enough, that she had done something no one else in his life had done in years. She had made him believe again that some people do the right thing when no one is watching, but he did not reach out. He only said, "You did everything right, Emily, more than I could have asked for." She nodded, but her fingers kept twisting the edge of her coat. When they pulled up in front of her small apartment building, Ethan told the driver to wait. He walked her to the door even though she protested that it was not necessary. She hesitated under the old awning, the snow still drifting down around them. "Thank you," she said. He shook his head. "Don't thank me, I should be thanking you." She started to turn away, but he caught her arm gently, just for a second. "You saved me today, Emily. Not just the company. Me." She looked at him, really looked, and for a moment all the noise of the street faded into the hush of falling snow. She almost said something, but instead she just nodded and slipped inside, leaving him alone on the icy sidewalk. Upstairs in her tiny apartment, Emily sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the old textbooks stacked on her shelf. She pulled one down, flipped through pages marked with tiny notes. Characters she had traced by hand years ago, when she still believed life could be something bigger than this. Tonight, she had spoken those words for real, for something that mattered, and for the first time she wondered what else might be possible. The next morning, the office was buzzing with quiet rumors. Someone had leaked that the cleaning girl had saved the CEO's deal. Veronica paced the executive hallway, phone pressed to her ear, voice low but sharp enough that the staff in the break room heard every word. "I don't care how you do it, dig up something on her. She's not staying in that office longer than I can help it." Meanwhile, Ethan sat alone at his desk, staring at a single file. He had asked HR for it before the sun came up. Emily Carter, hired 3 years ago through an outsourced cleaning service. No disciplinary marks, no complaints, no HR flags. Just a line that said East Asian Studies, 2 years completed, Howard University, no degree listed. He leaned back in his chair, turning that line over and over in his mind. Later that day, he found her in the staff corridor, arms full of fresh linens she did not need to be carrying anymore. He stopped her mid-step, ignored the 2 assistants, pretending not to watch. "Come with me," he said, not waiting for an answer. He led her to his office, the door clicking shut behind them. She stood there, stiff as a board, arms crossed tight. He sat on the edge of his desk, hands folded. "Why did you never finish your degree?" he asked. She blinked, caught off guard by how direct he was. "I couldn't afford it. My dad got sick, my mom needed help. I took the first job I could get." She dropped her eyes to the floor, her voice quieter now. "I always thought I'd go back, but life didn't exactly cooperate." He wanted to say he understood, but he did not want to insult her with a lie. He did not know what it felt like to choose a mop over a diploma, but he knew sacrifice. He knew the weight of family obligations and the bitterness of dreams delayed. He reached for a folder on his desk and held it out to her. "This is the draft for the next stage of the contract. I want you to be there when we finalize it, officially." She stared at the folder like it might burn her fingers. "I'm just the maid, Mr. Walker." He shook his head, voice firm. "Not anymore. You've proven you can do this. I want you on my team for real. Title, pay, contract, no more uniforms." She hesitated. "People will talk." He almost laughed at that. "People always talk. Let them." For a long moment neither of them spoke. Then slowly she reached out and took the folder. Their fingers brushed, and this time neither of them moved away. Ethan felt something spark through him at the contact, something warm and dangerous all at once. He wanted to say more, but Veronica's sharp knock at the door broke the spell. Emily stepped back, clutching the folder tight to her chest like armor. She looked at him one last time, eyes bright with something between fear and hope, then slipped out the side door before Veronica could see her. When the door opened, Veronica glided in like a snake dressed in silk. She leaned against his desk, eyes flicking toward the closed side door. "She's not your responsibility, you know. She did her part, send her back to the laundry carts and move on. It's cleaner that way." Ethan did not answer. He just looked out the window at the city buried in snow and thought about how sometimes the messiest choices were the only ones that made sense. And somewhere deep in the quiet corners of his mind, he wondered when, exactly, he had stopped seeing Emily Carter as just a maid and started seeing her as the one person who might change everything he thought he knew about trust, loyalty, and the second chances neither of them ever really believed they deserved. The next week unfolded like a tense chess game behind the glossy doors of Walker Global. News of Emily's sudden promotion spread fast, whispered behind coffee cups and half-closed blinds. Some thought she was Ethan's pet charity project, a temporary token he would forget as soon as the ink dried on the final deal. Others speculated in hushed tones that she was more than just a translator, that something personal must have happened in that glass conference room. Veronica did nothing to silence the rumors. If anything, she fed them, one sly comment at a time, each word crafted to make Emily look like a girl who knew how to trade secrets for favors. Emily did not bother defending herself. She came to work early, left late, and kept her head down when whispers followed her from the executive hallway to the staff elevators. She spent her nights in the small apartment she shared with her mother and younger brother, studying every word of the contract draft Ethan had handed her, memorizing names, figures, cultural traps that could sink the fragile bridge she was helping him build. Sometimes she wondered if it would be easier to quit and disappear before it all fell apart, but then she would think of Ethan's voice that night by her door, telling her she had saved him, and she forced herself to keep going. One evening, Ethan found her alone in the darkened boardroom, surrounded by empty takeout boxes and pages of notes. She did not hear him come in at first. He watched her for a moment, the way her brow furrowed as she mouthed through a complicated phrase, testing the sound of it. There were dozens of people in his building with fancy degrees and crisp suits, but not one of them had stayed this late for a job they were not even being paid for yet. "You need to sleep, Emily," he said quietly. She jumped a little, turning in her chair. "I'm fine, I'm almost done." He stepped closer, reaching over to take the pen from her hand before she could protest. "No one is paying you to kill yourself over this." She shook her head, the stubborn line of her jaw so familiar now it almost made him smile. "I'm not doing it for the money. I'm doing it because I don't want to mess up what we built." He sat down beside her at the long table, ignoring the pile of contracts between them. For a moment they were just two people in an empty room high above a city wrapped in winter. He looked at her tired eyes and wanted to tell her she did not have to carry this weight alone, but he knew she would not listen. He reached for her hand instead, surprised by how naturally it fit in his. She stiffened at first, but did not pull away. "Veronica's been busy," he said finally. Emily's mouth tightened. "I know. I hear the whispers." "Do you care?" he asked. She looked at him, really looked, and something soft flickered in her tired eyes. "Not about her. I care about you. I care what this does to you." Her voice cracked at the edge, and for a heartbeat, all the glass and steel around them seemed to vanish. He tightened his fingers around hers. When she spoke again, it was so quiet he almost missed it. "People like me don't get to keep things like this. Things this good don't last." Ethan exhaled, a laugh that wasn't really a laugh. "Maybe we proved them wrong. Together." He wanted to lean closer, but she pulled her hand away, breaking the moment before he could make a promise he was not ready to keep. She gathered her notes, eyes fixed on the door. I should get back to work. And just like that, the careful lines between them snapped back into place. Veronica made her move 3 days later. The final signing meeting was set for Friday morning, a public formality meant to impress investors and the press. The Chinese delegation was due back in the city. Invitations had gone out. A photographer from the Times was scheduled to cover the handshake that would make the front page. Everything was lined up. But when an anonymous email arrived in Ethan's inbox late Wednesday night, he knew exactly who was behind it before he even opened the attachment. He sat alone in his office, the city dark beyond the window. The file contained a series of grainy photos. Emily leaving his car in front of her building, Emily standing too close in the back hallway, Emily walking into his office alone at night. No captions, just the suggestion of a story that would ruin them both if it ever became more than a rumor. Veronica did not even bother hiding her satisfaction the next morning. She glided into his office uninvited, perfectly manicured hand setting a printed copy of the photos on his desk. "You know what this looks like, Ethan," she said sweetly. He did not look up from the photos. "I know exactly what this is," he said, his voice calm. She tilted her head, feigning innocence. "The board will see it differently. So will the press. Do you really think they'll let you keep her around after this? One scandal like this and your name is mud." He looked up then, eyes cold and sharp as glass. "What do you want?" Veronica smiled, the smile of someone who thought she had finally won. "Send her back to the basement where she belongs. Make it clear she's nothing to you. Keep the deal clean. Keep your reputation clean. And maybe, if you're smart, keep your company intact." When she left, Ethan sat there for a long time. He thought about the kid who had grown up scrubbing his father's warehouse floors because there was no money for hired help. He thought about the nights he'd slept in his office when the company nearly folded, the way he had clawed his way out of every trap life threw at him. He had always believed he could do anything alone, but tonight he realized he did not want to, not anymore. He found Emily in the staff kitchen, pouring herself a cheap cup of tea. She jumped when she saw him, but did not drop the cup. That steadiness almost undid him. He held up the photos. She looked at them, and her shoulders sagged as if she'd been expecting this. "She's trying to break us," she said softly. He caught the word before she did. "Us." He stepped closer. "It won't work, not if we don't let it." Her eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. "Ethan, I can't be the reason you lose everything." He touched her cheek, the first real touch that wasn't accidental or careful. "You're the reason I won't." She shook her head, a sad smile tugging at her lips. "You don't know how the world works for people like me." "Maybe I don't," he said, leaning in so close she could feel his breath. "But I know how it works for people like me. And I'm telling you, I'm not losing this. I'm not losing you." The next morning, the signing ceremony was packed with reporters. Veronica hovered at Ethan's shoulder, fake smile plastered in place as the cameras flashed. Emily stood just behind the main table, translation notes ready. She felt every eye on her, some curious, some judging. She kept her chin up anyway. Mr. Chen greeted Ethan warmly, his handshake firm. He spoke directly to Emily first, thanking her for her help in navigating the final language points over. Ethan made a point to repeat every word for the cameras. Veronica's smile flickered just slightly. When the final papers were signed, Ethan turned to the cameras and did exactly what Veronica had told him not to do. He called Emily forward, introduced her by name, and told every reporter in the room that without her, there would be no deal. No Walker Global expansion, no front-page handshake. He saw the flash of fury in Veronica's eyes when the room erupted in polite applause. Later, in the private lounge, Veronica cornered Emily alone, her voice sharp and low. "Enjoy it while it lasts. He'll get bored. They always do. And when he does, you'll be back to scrubbing floors for the next man who doesn't look twice at you." Emily felt her fears spike, but then she thought of Ethan's hand on hers in the empty boardroom, of the way he had looked at her when he promised not to lose her. She stepped closer until their noses almost touched. "I'm not the one who should be worried about getting thrown out of this building, Veronica. I know what you did." Veronica's eyes narrowed. "You have nothing." Emily's lips curled into the smallest, calmest smile she had ever worn. "Not yet. But you made me invisible long enough to learn exactly where to look." When she turned away, her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. But for the first time, the fear did not win. For the first time, she believed in a future that belonged to her, not because Ethan promised it, but because she had already proved she could build it herself if she had to. 2 weeks after the signing ceremony, the winter snow finally began to melt into dirty puddles along Manhattan's curbs. Inside Walker Global's tower, however, the frost between Veronica and Emily only grew sharper. Everyone sensed it, though no one dared name it aloud. Ethan knew exactly what game Veronica was playing. He watched her smile in meetings, watched her whisper to board members behind closed doors, watched the way she always made sure Emily overheard her sharpest words. Emily stayed silent through it all, but Ethan saw how her shoulders tensed every time Veronica's voice drifted down the hallway like poison in the air. One evening, Ethan asked Emily to meet him in the small rooftop garden no one really used in winter except him. He liked the view from up there, the cold wind that reminded him he was still alive when the weight of boardrooms and contracts threatened to bury him in marble and glass. Emily arrived, bundled in her old coat, cheeks pink from the wind, her hair pinned up the way she always wore it now. She looked older than the girl who had once scrubbed coffee stains from conference tables at dawn, yet somehow younger too, like some hidden piece of her had finally woken up after years asleep. Ethan stood leaning against the low stone wall, Manhattan's lights glittering behind him. He handed her a cup of hot tea, which she cradled in her cold hands without speaking. They stood there like that for a long time, the city humming below, words tangled in the hush between them. Finally, she asked the question that had been burning holes in both of them since the day she walked into his office, with nothing but a mop bucket and a secret gift for language. "Well, Ethan, out of all the people you could have trusted, why me?" He turned toward her, studying the lines of her face under the rooftop lights. "Because you didn't ask for anything in return. You just did what needed to be done. You didn't care who was watching." She let out a small, breathless laugh that did not sound like amusement. "People think I wanted this for power, for money, for you. Maybe they're right." She looked down into her cup. "Maybe I did want you." His chest tightened at her words, the honesty in them sharper than any boardroom betrayal he had ever faced. He stepped closer, close enough that her breath hitched when the wind shifted between them. "Emily," he said softly, "you can want me all you want. I want you too." "That's not the problem." She shook her head, the steam of the tea drifting between them. "No, Ethan. The problem is I don't want to lose myself in this. I spent so many years being invisible, I don't know who I am when someone finally sees me." He reached for her hand, covering her cold fingers with his own. "Then don't disappear. Not from me, not from this. We can figure it out together." She pulled her hand away, but not out of anger. Her eyes shimmered with tears she refused to let fall. "You say that now. But what happens when they come after you because of me? When Veronica feeds the board more rumors, when the press digs up everything they can to make me look like some desperate girl who slept her way up 20 floors. He closed the small space between them, resting his forehead against hers, their breath mingling in the icy air. "Then they'll find out that I don't care. They'll find out you didn't sleep your way to anything. You worked for this harder than anyone else ever did." She let out a shaky breath, her lips so close to his that her words brushed his mouth when she spoke. "And what if you lose everything because of me?" His answer was so quiet she almost didn't hear it over the wind. "Then maybe it's worth losing." He kissed her then, not like a CEO who owned entire floors of a city skyline, but like a man who had nothing to lose but her. She kissed him back, her hands fisting in the front of his coat, holding on like the rooftop might give way beneath her feet if she let go. For a moment the city disappeared, the rumors vanished. The glass walls and sharp whispers of people like Veronica fell silent under the pulse pounding in their veins. When they pulled apart, they were both breathing hard, eyes wide as if they had stumbled into something neither of them knew how to name yet. She stepped back first, brushing a thumb across her lips as if to ground herself. "This is dangerous, Ethan." He almost laughed. "Everything worth doing is." The next morning, Veronica struck again. She cornered Ethan in his office before Emily arrived, a glossy folder in hand. She threw it on his desk with a force that betrayed the sweet smile on her lips. "I'm done playing nice. This ends now." Inside the folder were financial statements, petty invoices marked in ways that painted Emily as a manipulator. Veronica claimed Emily had funneled company resources into fake expenses. It was sloppy, but believable enough for a headline if someone wanted it to be. Ethan flipped through the pages with growing disgust, not at Emily, but at how far Veronica had gone to protect her crumbling hold on the company's gossip chains. "You forged these," he said flatly. Veronica tilted her head the way she always did when she wanted to look innocent. "Prove it?" He stood so fast his chair nearly tipped over. "Get out of my office, Veronica." She did not move. "You think you're untouchable because of her? Do you really think the board will stand behind you when they see what she really is? A maid playing dress-up in an office she has no right to stand in?" He stepped around the desk, his voice so quiet she flinched when she heard it. "If I ever hear you speak about her like that again, you'll be lucky to find a job wiping floors yourself." She laughed then, a brittle sound that cracked at the edges. "Fine, then you've chosen her. Let's see how that works out for you when the headlines hit." She stormed out, her perfume lingering like a bitter aftertaste in the space she left behind. Ethan sat down heavily, running a hand through his hair. He knew she would not go quietly. He knew Emily would not run. He also knew the board would not like any of this when they found out. But for the first time in his life, he did not care about pleasing everyone. He only cared about protecting the one person who had stood beside him when everyone else was ready to let him drown. Later that night, Emily found him alone in the conference room again, staring at the skyline that looked so bright and empty all at once. She stepped inside without knocking, setting a stack of files on the table between them. "Proof," she said before he could ask. Every invoice Veronica forged, every signature she faked, every supplier she skimmed off the top. "I know where to look because I used to clean the cabinets she thought no one would ever open." He stared at the stack, then at her, realization dawning slow and sharp. "You did this alone?" She nodded. "I had to. I couldn't let her win. Not when we've come this far." He moved around the table so quickly she barely had time to react before his arms were around her, pulling her close. She tensed at first, but then she melted into him, burying her face against his shoulder like she had been waiting for this moment longer than she could admit. They stood there, two people who should never have been in the same room at all if the world had its way, and for the first time neither of them felt invisible. They felt seen, chosen, necessary. When he pulled back, he cupped her face in his hands, brushing his thumb across her cheek. "I don't know what comes next, but whatever it is, I'm not doing it without you." She smiled, the smallest smile, but it was real and it was hers. "Good, because I'm not cleaning up your mess alone anymore." Outside the glass walls, the city hummed on, unaware that somewhere high above its sleepless streets, two people who were never supposed to meet had found something worth risking everything to protect. 6 months later, the spring sun warmed the glass walls of Walker Global's tower, and the rooftop garden that had once been cold and empty now bloomed with flowers that Emily insisted on tending herself when she needed a break from contracts and back-to-back meetings. She no longer wore the plain maid's uniform that used to make her invisible. Now she stepped through these halls in tailored suits, her hair still pinned up but with soft strands that framed her face, the way Ethan liked best when he caught sight of her in the reflection of his office window. Most people in the building had stopped whispering. Some still called her lucky behind closed doors, but no one could deny that the company's biggest international partnership was thriving because of her. She had taken meetings Ethan did not have time for, smoothed out misunderstandings before they turned into crises, and even flown to Beijing for a month to finalize details that might have fallen apart without her quiet but unwavering voice. Veronica did not work there anymore. Her carefully crafted schemes had collapsed under the weight of the truth Emily had laid out piece by piece for the board to see. No forged invoice could survive the stack of real documents Emily had collected over years spent cleaning the offices Veronica thought no one else could see into. The board had voted to cut ties with Veronica within 48 hours of Emily's final presentation. No public scandal, just a neat exit that left no room for rumors. Some said Ethan was ruthless for how quickly he signed the termination papers, but when people asked Emily about it, she only smiled and said, sometimes cleaning up was the kindest thing you could do for everyone. Ethan and Emily did not make a spectacle of what they were to each other. There was no official announcement, no grand interview, but anyone with eyes could see it in the way he waited for her in the lobby when she worked late, or the way she brushed a speck of lint from his jacket before a big meeting. Their closeness was quiet, honest, impossible to twist into cheap gossip because it did not hide behind closed doors, but stood in plain sight, like something earned and kept with care. One evening, as the city lights flickered on below them, Ethan found Emily in the rooftop garden, her shoes kicked off, her feet curled under her as she watered the new flowers she had planted last week. He watched her for a moment, remembering the first time he had seen her standing, small and unnoticed next to a cleaning cart, offering him the only chance he had left to keep everything from crumbling. When she looked up and saw him there, she smiled that soft smile that still made his chest tighten. He crossed the garden, knelt beside her, and pressed a small velvet box into her hand without a word. She opened it slowly, her breath catching when she saw the simple ring inside. No grand speech, no staged proposal. Just his voice, low and certain, when he said, "I don't want a future in this building or anywhere else if you're not in it." She laughed through the tears that filled her eyes and said yes so quietly he almost missed it, but he heard it in every beat of her heart when she leaned into his arms. They stayed there long after the city below fell asleep, two people who had found each other when no one was looking and built something unbreakable out of all the small moments everyone else had ignored. Sometimes the strongest people are the ones no one notices until they stand up and remind the world they were never invisible at all. And sometimes the greatest love stories begin with nothing more than a single chance to speak up when it matters most. If this story touched you, remember this: real loyalty and quiet talent can build an empire and win a heart when the world least expects it.